All right, so we're gonna get started. I wanna start off by welcoming everyone to this event on the intersection of public sector jobs and the Black Lives Matter movement. My name is Robert Cuffey. I'm one of the members of the organizing committee for the Democratic Socialists of America's Labor Branch, as well as for the Afrosocialists Caucus, and I work for the city's Administration for Children's Services, and I'm represented by DC 37, Local 371. So this forum is being put on today by several endorsing organizations. The main sponsors are the Democratic Socialists of America, which is the largest socialist organization in the US, and the New York City Labor Branch, which is where workers who are involved in the union movement are trying to organize their workplaces, organized outside of the city's geographical branches. Today, we're gonna hear from some speakers who themselves work in the public sector and are workplace militants themselves within the unions and have been deeply affected by the ongoing uprising against police brutality sparked by the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So if you're in the audience and you have access to the chat, I'm not sure if that's still happening.
I can turn it on.
Yeah, so people can introduce themselves, the audience can introduce themselves in the chat by saying your name, your preferred pronoun, where you work if you're comfortable with that, or what union you're represented by, if any, so we can just get a gauge of who's in the audience. And before we move on, I just wanted to very quickly shout out those organizations that endorsed us. I just need a second to pull that information up, and who helped to spread the word on this forum as well. I see we have a lot of people here from NYSNA, the PSC at CUNY, HSTAT, DC 37, HPD folk, retirees as well. So, Peter, is it possible for you to copy and paste the endorsing organizations from that Google form and send it to me?
Absolutely, I can. I'll put it in the chat and send it to you as well.
So while you do that, I can move towards having our speakers introduce themselves. So with us, we have people from a broad range of the public sector in New York City, and we're going to start with Anthony. Anthony, if you can introduce yourself, tell us your name, your preferred pronouns, where you work, and what union or caucus you represent.
Sure, thanks, Robert. My name is Anthony Steiniger. I'm a train operator with the MTA, New York City Transit. You can call me he. And I'm with a coalition within the union, Local 100 Fight Back, and we're working to make our union more democratic and to work for the members rather than management and the select few.
Thank you, Anthony. Sharon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Sharon Gordon. I'm a registered nurse. My union is NYSNA, New York State Nurses Association. Prefer she, her. And I'm a delegate with NYSNA at one of the H&H facility, or I can say it, Jacoby Medical Center. And our hopes is to change the mindset of my colleagues, more so the NYSNA members, and to get them on board and to get some change going within this facility. It's been a long time coming, so we're just hoping for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And before we move on to our next speaker, I just want to remind people coming into the call to, in the chat, introduce yourself with your name, your preferred pronouns, where you work, if you're comfortable with that, and the union you're represented by, if any. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay, yes, I am Mark Polite. I am with Local 384. We work under CUNY. I work at the City College of New York. And, you know, we're basically just trying to get a hold on what's going on. So, yeah, so that's pretty much what's going on. That's where I'm coming from. Can you hear?
Thank you, Mark. Sabrina?
Hi, I'm Sabrina Basile. I use they or my name pronouns. I'm an urban planner at Housing Preservation and Development, HPD, and my union is DC 37, Local 371, and I'm also part of the newly formed DC 37 Progressive Caucus.
Thank you, Sabrina. I'm slacking. I'm also part of the newly formed DC 37 Progressive Caucus people. And last but certainly not least, Denisha.
Hi, my name is Denisha Jones. I'm a teacher educator at Sarah Lawrence College. I'm also on the steering committee for the New York City and the National Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. So I'm here representing them and the MORE Caucus for being supporters of BLM at school.
Thanks, Denisha. So we're gonna move into our speakers, but before we do that, I just wanted to explain the nature of today's call and how it'll work. We're gonna hear from each speaker for about 8 minutes as they speak to questions of how COVID-19 has affected their job and the intersection of public sector jobs with the Black Lives Matter movement. After that, we're gonna have a breakout group and then some report backs, and we'll, towards the end of the call, we'll hold space for a large group discussion as well. And we wanna end this call with taking some steps towards building a public sector coalition against the austerity that's being handed down from Albany and City Hall. So I hope people stick around towards the end of the call so we can start building the infrastructure on that. Without too much ado, I want to move into hearing from our speakers, and Anthony from Transit has been brave enough to go first. This kind of bravery shouldn't be unexpected from the transit workers who are literally out there risking their lives moving us around the city. So Anthony, if you can just briefly reintroduce yourself and let people know how things have been going at work for you and how we can plug in with the BLM movement.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, once again, my name is Anthony Steiniger. I'm a train operator with New York City Transit. Proud to be a train operator, love my job, love serving the people of New York. I'm with a coalition within my union. We call ourselves Local 100 Fight Back. And we take the name because that's what we do. We fight back. We fight back against all of the injustices that are taking place and all the exploitation that is taking place. And it's really been highlighted by the response to the COVID-19 epidemic that we've seen. And with transit, I'm sure if you've been following the news or you've seen that we have had over 130 transit workers who have passed away due to due to the COVID-19 virus. And transit, their response initially was pathetic. Initially, they forbade workers from wearing masks, their own masks that they brought in. And they were slow to provide us with PPE. As a result, thousands of us got ill. And as I mentioned, over 130, close to 140 of us have passed away. I personally became ill with the virus on March the 18th. I got ill. I brought the virus home. Everyone in my house at the time got ill. My wife, my son. My wife was so sick that we thought that we may have to bring her to the hospital. She had to use a nebulizer at home, had difficulty breathing. I had body aches, pains, headache, sore throat, super fatigue. I still have what my doctor's referring to as a post-viral fatigue syndrome, where I get fatigued more easily than I used to. And that can be blamed squarely on the fact that I work in an enclosed environment in the subways. All the research, all that we know about this virus, it's airborne through droplets, and in an enclosed space in the subway, that's all you really have. And it wasn't until recently that transit was mandating that riders wear masks, and that they were distributing sufficient PPE to the employees themselves. But now, after 140 of us are dead, thousands of us have gotten ill, now they're distributing masks and hand sanitizer. But it wasn't like that initially. And we initially called for the subway system to be shut down, which didn't happen. But after people got ill, they shut down the system at night for cleaning. It's like, I felt, and I said this before, that they use us, the transit workers, as an experiment in herd immunity. It's like they really didn't care. It was like, if we got sick, we got sick. If you survived, you survived. And that's the way I felt. And the evidence pretty much bears that out. And our union response wasn't much of a fight back. I mean, when you have members dying, the first and foremost, all of us here, many of us here are union members. And I'm sure you will agree that the first and foremost responsibility of any union president, any union leader, is the safety of the members. And our union members were dying. No calls to shut the system down. No calls or no instructions given to members on how to file what is known in our job as a safety dispute resolution form. There was no union representatives going out to terminals and telling people to fill out these forms, because it was not safe at the time to get on a train without a mask, without gloves, without that train being clean. And I believe if our union would have had that type of response, many of us would have been alive, and many of us would not have gotten sick. Many of us would not have brought this virus home to our family members. There's 130 of us dead. I really don't know how many of us brought this home to family members where they may have had casualties there, may have had fatalities there, or serious illness there. Like I said before, I know my wife was seriously ill. Thank God she has recovered. But at the time, we didn't know. Yeah. And, linking this to the BLM struggle, the BLM struggle initially, the Black Lives Matter struggle initially came about to protest police brutality and the deaths of unarmed Black men at the hands of police. And this, in all labor struggles, is initially the same struggle as the BLM struggle. The violence doesn't really have to take place. It doesn't have to take the form of a police officer shooting you. It is violent. It is a violence to not provide people with proper protections. It's violence to, in other industries, not just mine, to call a worker essential and have them going to work without protections, like what was done with the meatpacking plants out west, where Trump ordered these people back to work without any protections, and people became ill and people died. That's violence as well. And the fact that our union is upwards of 80% minority, we all should be in solidarity with the BLM movement. And it should be expanded to include labor, to include not just the public sector, but the private sector as well. Now, for us, we have gone back to work pretty much at a full schedule. And we're given some PPE, but we really need more. We need to have, as far as my colleagues in buses, they need to be completely enclosed. The ventilation systems need to be improved. On the subways, we need to have better ventilation systems. We need to be given N95 masks each and every day. These are one-time use masks. They should be distributed to each and every employee. They should be mandated and enforced that riders wear masks. And the train should be cleaned each and every time it comes into the terminal, every car, especially the operating positions. But what I'd like to see happen as a result of this is everyone on this call, that we form, we stand in solidarity in each other's struggles. You know, I know that the schools are going to be opening up, or at least they're trying to open them up this fall. And that's basically a recipe for disaster. You're going to have children in closed places, and you're going to have teachers there for 45 minutes at a time in a classroom with 30 other people who've had contact with people all throughout the day. And there's no way to do any type of contact tracing, or no way to protect a classroom full of kids or those teachers. And I think that everybody here should stand in solidarity, because that's the next big fight that's going to be coming up with labor in the public sector. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Anthony. Really appreciate you giving us an update on what's happening in transit. I heard you say, for example, the experiment in herd immunity, right? So one of the things I read recently is that people's immunities don't necessarily build up the first time around. So you could have COVID-19 and get it back again, which is one of the most tragic things about this disease, which in addition to being transmittable while you're asymptomatic, is just tearing people apart. So people are taking a lot of risks, as we can see. And I hope everyone would heed Anthony's advice and not just wear your mask as a chin strap, but wear your mask when you're on the train for the safety of the riders and everyone else. If we can move on now to Sharon, who works with NYSNA, because I think healthcare is another front on which fighting for Black lives and against the disproportionate impact on Black lives by COVID-19 has been an important place. Sharon, can we hear from you?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. So let me first state this. I am a psychiatric mental health nurse. And with that being said, the unit that I worked on is not only a locked unit, it's located on the 8th floor of a building where everything is locked. Nothing is open, no windows, and just recycled air. That's what I call it. And during this whole COVID pandemic, we weren't prepared. The day in question, March 28th, our union decided that, you know, we had had enough and we were going to rally for the purpose of personal protective equipment. That morning, I was getting ready to come to the rally when I got word that one of my colleagues, or nurse educator, had died from COVID. I was devastated because now this hit home. What do we do? What's the cause? We didn't have any PPEs. I had just seen her a week ago where she had given me papers to distribute to the rest of the staff. What do we do? Management was telling us, you'll get an N95, but you must use it for at least a week. Please be mindful that in psychiatry, if I'm working in the ER, it's a revolving door. So we had numerous patients coming in, but we had one mask and we had to use it every day if you're there for a week. We weren't prepared. Management was not supportive of us. I don't even think they cared. You know, you just had to come, do what was required, provide services. You're unsure, you know, how this disease is spread. Was it droplet? Was it airborne? We weren't sure. And not to mention, here it is, one of my colleagues is dead. And what do? You question your own mortality. You question everything in that moment. I work at a facility that is located in the Northeast Bronx, and the majority of the patients that come to this facility are Black and Latinos. Now there's proposed cuts. What do we do? How do we provide the services to this community? How do we protect ourselves, not knowing? But management, again, is not supportive. It took us a while to get PPEs, to get testing done, testing for the staff, testing for the public. We weren't sure if you're exposed and asymptomatic. Do you come to work? Do you not come to work? What do you do? But at the same time, as a nurse, we can't stay home. We had to be at work. You're required to come to work if you're asymptomatic. So now we decide we need to organize. Something has to change. This can't continue. You have patients coming in from all walks, all countries, you name it. Come to Jacobi Medical Center. But we have to provide the service. And here it is, they're proposing cuts. Cut healthcare. Okay, you cut healthcare. Who will provide the services to this particular population? We talk about Black Lives Matter. Okay, the majority of the patients that I service are either Black and Latinos. So how do I service them? You know, what services will be cut? You know, the disparities in healthcare is already vast. So here it is, we're at the center of a pandemic. We're at a public hospital where, regardless of the inability to pay, we have to see these patients and we have to provide the best quality care. But we don't have the services that we need to do that. So we need to organize. We need to change what has been the standard. We need to get something in place to say, in the event of, this is what needs to be done to minimize either the deaths or the exposure, either or. We can provide education, but at the same token, if you don't have the staff we're overworked, we're burnt out, you know, and with everything that took place, now that all the FEMA nurses are gone, now that all the military nurses are gone, we're back to being short-staffed already, and their proposed cuts to already a strained public health system. Not only do we need help, we definitely need to just change the whole dynamics of how management views this. You know, it's for profit for them, but we're on the front line and we're faced with these patients. We're faced in the public on a daily basis, and we don't have the tools to do what we do best, which is provide care. There are days when emotionally I'm drained, because with this pandemic, as a psychiatric mental health nurse, we see a lot of patients now coming in with their own fear. Will I get this? I got this. I've passed it on to my family members. What do I do? The depression for those who had to stay home. They're calling 911 and coming in because they've been locked in their homes, and they're like, you know what? Not only am I afraid of COVID, I don't have the choice to go and see friends and family, so I come to the hospital. And it's a facility that I work that I can't turn anyone away. And they're proposing cuts. Okay? All lives matter, I agree, but the majority of the public that I serve, like I said, are Blacks and Latinos. It's a disservice. It's shameful. We're crying for help, but we definitely need to change and organize how we treat our patients and how management treats us. And that's my overall message right now with regards to what takes place. My life matters. I think everybody's here that, you know, life matters. As a Black nurse, I am faced with a lot of my own issues, but every day I have to come to work and put my best face forward and serve the population that, you know, I have to take care of.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
And for the great sacrifice you're making, both at work on behalf of people and Black people in the city, as well as what you're sacrificing to be here with us tonight. I think the schools and healthcare are such critical fields where Black lives do interact with the general motive of our society. And this contradiction between the fact that we want human needs addressed, but we're living in a society based on profit, right? So these cuts Sharon are talking about, the city is proposing a cut of 22,000 public sector jobs. And we know that this will fall heaviest upon the city's Black and Latin population. About 60% of the city's union movement, right, generally is Black and Latinx itself. So if these cuts come about, we know what they're gonna do. They're gonna devastate working class people who weren't really doing that well to begin with before these crises started. Like even today, I was at downtown Presbyterian for a MRI, and they were like, oh, you can't use that mask. Your mask has a piece of metal on it. I was like, okay, cool, give me a surgical mask. And I didn't even know where it is to show you, but I was given an eye mask to wear as a surgical mask because they said they were so low on surgical masks for the staff, they could not afford me a surgical mask. And then when they were trying to give me the earplugs, the worker kept fumbling them, and she had to say, I'm sorry, they don't have gloves of the right size for us, right? So she can't even operate properly. So it's a very practical effect we're having on our daily lived experiences from these cuts that are at this point just proposed and not enacted. So just imagine the impact it would have on all of us. So with that, I'd like to turn over to Mark Polite. Mark, if you can tell us how things are going within CUNY and your experiences at City College and with your DC 37 local.
Okay, then sure, Robert. Thank you. So I'm really speaking from the vantage point of having 4 months of being home and 4 months of dealing with this situation. For those who may not have got it from my first introduction, in addition to being with Local 384, I'm also the shop steward at the City College campus. So that gives me a different perspective as to, what's being done and what's not being done. And I would say that, ultimately, unfortunately, in terms of the initial response, from both management and the union, it was very, very slow. And, like after we got home and everything, the communication, well, I'll just start off by saying this. I've been working from home, in most of the COAs. COAs are the CUNY office assistants, basically the clerical staff. The people that when you go to any front office, whether it be English or registrar, the people who help you at the front desk. That's basically people in my title. So there are 90 of us on campus, and as of March 16th, all of us were working from home. But I can say in between that time and now, the communications have been kind of spotty between the official union and the members. I guess the point is that as long as we're home and safe, then there's really no concerns. But even in the interregnum, I've pushed to ask union officials about what's the next step, and I've kind of gotten somewhat of a cold shoulder. And maybe it's because they really don't know, because it really seems like the governor doesn't know like when everybody's going to go back either. So there's just a lot of confusion. If you add that to what's happening, there's a lot of articles that circulated recently about how much of the death toll came from CUNY. For those who might not have seen it, there's an obituary page of people who worked in CUNY who was lost to the coronavirus. And on that list was about 40 people. So CUNY, while definitely not hit as hard as transit, no doubt, but we definitely, as a university system, we felt it there too. So so the concern is, like once people come back, and what's gonna happen then? And in particular, like it's just like you go to, it's like the old thing about you go to DMV and they call your number, right? We're almost at the point where our number is about to be called, and it's a very tenuous thing. For those who don't know, phase 4 also includes higher education. We're supposed to be the last ones to open up, and phase 4 is officially supposed to begin somewhere around July 20th, which gives us a week or so. But I have a lot of valid concerns because as the rep, and as far as having time to get prepared for the campus, because how can you sanitize a campus? Let's just talk about City College alone. How can you have the requisite time to sanitize the campus, every single building, South Campus, North Campus, and make sure that it's clean every day and it's deep cleaned? I don't think it's possible for that to be done by July 20th. And even if you want to go like you want to stay open for the fall, and there's just so much confusion. I'm seeing in the ABC News that the CUNY is going to be mostly online, right? But we still don't know what that's going to mean for the staff. Are they going to demand that the staff be there? And if that's the case, what is going to be done? Are buildings and ground going to install plexiglass in front of the offices, in front of the front desk, so there's a physical barrier to deal with students who are constantly coming in? The question of even security, and how do you deal with a belligerent student that doesn't want to wear a mask? Because there's been constant incidents of that happening, and you need to be able to protect your staff. So there's a lot of questions I have about that, and there are just so many things that cannot happen, and are really looking like a logistical nightmare, within a short time frame. Like, I'll give you another example of a time constraint. Phase 4 is supposed to begin July 20th. Officially, the City College semester is supposed to begin August 26th. Now, I'm pretty sure most of us who have experience dealing with city and state bureaucracies can appreciate that, the lack of confidence that most of us have in the ability to do the right thing, even in such a long frame of time. I just don't believe that it's possible, right, for CUNY to have every campus ready to go between July 20th and August 26th. That means a day in 6 months. We're supposed to get the whole campus ready to receive students, even if it's reduced online. We should have to get the whole campus of, in my case, 14,000 students. Even if you cut it by 60%, that's still thousands of students on campus. How do you plan to get a campus of that size ready within the span of a month and 6 days, and protect the staff? So there's just so many questions there. Like, and then CUNY is famous for crying broke. They've already preemptively cut the budgets on a lot of people. Like, I'm sure people know to a certain extent that a lot of adjuncts have been let go. And that's going to mean, if it's in person, that's going to mean larger size classes, which people are not really realizing. Also, another factor that people may not be aware of, because it's more of an inside baseball kind of thing. The problem is a lot of college assistants got cut too. College assistants are the part-timers who work in the office, and people really don't have an idea of how reliant the campus and CUNY in general are on college assistants. So, you have a compound effect of cut budgets, reduced staff, and you're expected to still provide the same level of support. So whenever we come back to campus, or even if we're still working remotely, which probably is the best way to go, the workload is going to be, pretty much double or even tripled in some cases. So, that in itself is a union issue. So, yeah, but I not talked about a lot of things, but I think I'll end with this. I didn't get a chance to talk about the connection to Black Lives Matter, but what I will say is that in my opinion, the way for higher ed to win is to really tie this struggles to protect the students and to protect the staff. If we want to tie our struggles to the struggles about the public schools, like, people are talking about how, marching the kids into the pandemic is a death sentence, it's a potential death sentence. I think that if we want to establish a linkage, we have to tie higher education to the struggles of the teachers and the struggles of the parents against, officials that want to send the kids back to school, like prematurely. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks for that, Mark. So, and I think the historical relevance of how people like Mark himself, as both a student, graduate, and now someone who works at CUNY, ended up in those spaces, ties into these struggles as well, right? Because open admission, which was the process through which students of color started getting onto the CUNY campus, and at that time, actually tuition free, was something that was fought for by the students of color on campus who were going through discrimination after getting onto campus in the wake of the civil rights movement. And as more and more CUNY has become a place for students of color and for people to try to have some kind of social mobility out of poverty and into the better parts of the working class and maybe the middle class, we're seeing these cuts coming to these jobs that are also in line with a rise in tuition for the students and a debt load that's being carried around for almost a lifetime. So thank you for plugging in those things, Mark. I just wanted to let people know, so Peter, who is also helping to organize this forum, is putting in the chat a link for people to sign up. If you're here in this discussion, I think there's 186 of us right now, please be sure to sign up there so you too can become part of our burgeoning coalition of public sector workers and our supporters against the cuts. I want to move on to another DC 37 member, Sabrina, who, very reflective of the decentralized structure of DC 37, is not only in a whole other local, but works for a whole different city agency. So Sabrina, if you can speak to your experiences about COVID-19, Black Lives Matter, and how we can fight back.
Yeah, hi. Again, I'm Sabrina, and I work for the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, or HPD. Like Mark, I also have been working from home, but I acknowledge that in the beginning, other folks haven't been able to. But I guess I wanted to touch on more about the battle to preserve and expand our public sector services and our workforce, and the ways to, like how we can link that, the fight for public sector jobs to the Black Lives Matter movement or to racial justice. So how I see it is that we know that we need a complete reorganization of the United States out of capitalism. And so if we're going to talk about racial justice, that means absolutely more funding for the public sector and not austerity. Racial justice and the fight for Black Lives Matter looks like abolishing the NYPD and using the funds for reparative justice. And so I'll talk about what that looks like at the Department of Housing Preservation and Development at HPD. We're one of the agencies that got budget cuts to affordable housing during a pandemic. So that makes sense. So that looks like increased funding. It looks like a redesign of housing policy that actually centers homeless people, people with little to no income, rather than the developers who we keep continually giving money to, who exploit Black and brown labor in the communities that are rezoned for or picked for neighborhood revitalization. And then they leave the communities with nothing of their own. So it looks like a commitment to the Declaration of Housing as a human right and supporting bills like good cause eviction. There's a recent, I think just today, there's new local state rent and mortgage legislation to cancel rent and mortgage. So supporting that, supporting opportunities for tenants to purchase their own home and start acquiring buildings for public use. And I mean, it's just, if we're calling for racial justice, we just need more funding for tools that are going to help Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities sustain outside of a capitalist system. So that's just, again, for HPD, more public funding for CLTs, for community land trusts, for social housing, and the end of the privatization of public land and NYCHA. And these are all demands and tools that are community owned that'll help shield especially Black and Brown communities from the continued wealth extraction and labor extraction. And then I'll also say, for me, within my agency, it's been important to continue to push for political education, to start to unpack the ways in which we perpetuate systemic racism, perpetuate the exploitation and extraction of Black and Brown communities. So I've been organizing with some folks, and that's been my first time doing workplace organizing. And that looked like connecting with like folks like Robert or like DSA Labor, to get a better understanding of what workplace organizing looks like. But we've had, like, our success has been that at least there's like a commitment to racial justice within senior levels in my team. 2 minutes. So yeah, so there's just more of a discussion around kind of unpacking that and thinking more critically about the ways in which, as an agency for affordable housing, how we're not creating affordable housing for the people who need it the most. I'm early.
Yeah, and also feel free to share that awesome website you guys helped to create that kind of gathers all the petitions and the different actions happening. You know what I'm talking about, right?
The NY COVID action?
Yes. Share that so people can
yeah.
That's some of the work, like that's some of the organizing we've done together, because the city's union groups kind of have a pecking order, and DC 37 is not pretty high up on the order, kind of because we're broken up into all these different locals and don't really know each other. So those of us who do these jobs that are not necessarily like a big link in the chain, like transit or working in a school or working in a hospital, but nonetheless are forced to prop up the city's service industry, like what it provides to people, were weirdly still asked to go into the office when it became clear that the offices were a danger, right? So like Sabrina and I had to do things like organize our workplaces to get PPE or just to start working from home. And it became such a struggle that we kind of all just launched petitions at work to get things done. And one of the great things about the website Sabrina is going to share, it kind of houses all those petitions in one place. People from the Parks Department asking for the parks to close at one point, people from my job at ACS asking for PPE and a restriction on visiting with families, so we wouldn't be a vector passing the virus around from place to place. So there has been some organic interaction between those of us across the public sector, and hopefully coming out of this, this is something we can continue to tap into. So speaking of major links in the chain, I want to turn it over to Denisha. We all should know that the teachers played a major role in getting the schools closed, but it's kind of like we have no breathing space now, given that summer is in full swing and pretty soon the schools are to be reopened. So Denisha, if you can talk to us about what's happening in the public education system, please.
Sure, thanks again. Hello, my name is Denisha Jones. I'm a teacher educator at Sarah Lawrence College, and I work with the National and the New York City Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. So just to speak a little bit about what happened to teachers, as we know, the schools did not close right away when the virus started spreading, and this cost lives in all areas of the sector. And I also want to thank Sharon and Anthony and Sabrina and Mark for sharing their experience as well too. But we know that was a factor in the death of teachers, right? The delay in closing the schools when the virus started spreading, and that became an issue. And so schools finally closed, and we just told teachers to do it, to start teaching from home remotely without any training. I've been in higher education for 16 years. I've taught online college courses that I've designed for 3 years now, and I spent a year being paid and given the time to design those courses, and I tweaked them every year, and yet here we are, we took the nation's teachers and gave them a day, a couple days, maybe spring break, and said, go, do this work, take all the work that you do and put it online. And they did. And now that schools are looking for summer and reopening, we're seeing how the schools are being, the teachers are being pitted against the parents for this idea that teachers must solve the nation's childcare issues instead of the country doing what other countries have done, which is paying people to stay home, who can stay home, so that they don't exacerbate the system, like the transit system, the hospitals, right, and the schools, right? And this country's not doing that. Instead, it's demanding that teachers go to work and sacrifice their health and the health of their loved ones, and even the health of their students, when we know that the virus is still spreading in lots of areas. It looks like New York City is going to do what most states are doing and to push a hybrid option, encouraging all families who want 100% online teaching for the fall to do that. Of course, many families are concerned about the impact that's going to have on their children, right, to not be in school. They know that there's not all students do well in an online environment, and many students are hungry for the social interaction. And then it'll be up to schools to determine if they can offer some type of in-person, which no school in New York City, I can say that, no school in New York City can meet social distance requirement at the current capacity of schools. We all know that schools are overcrowded. Most teachers have 30, 35, 40 students in the classroom in a space not big enough for social distance. So there are plans to look at, splitting the school up into different cohorts so that, cohort A goes on Monday and Wednesday, cohort B goes on Tuesday and Thursday, and then they split Fridays, right? Or even 3 cohorts, depending on the size of the school, so that students would be in school for 5 days over 3 weeks, right? Maybe 1 day, 1 week, 2 days, another week, 3 days, another week. Again, none of this is finalized. I know they're working on it. And then there's still the issue, the battle between Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo, who gets to say whether New York schools can open and when they do. So that's kind of what the teachers are facing with, and kind of this decision that if you don't return to school, then you're out of a job. And that's challenging because for many good reasons, many teachers are not comfortable returning. They live at home with someone who's immunocompromised, and they don't want to risk bringing the virus to them. No one's talked about what happens if a teacher is sent to go home to quarantine for 14 days. Who are they being paid for those 14 days? Or is that coming out of their benefits? Is someone paying for that? How is that going to play out? There's also issues around having students online for 2 days, at home for 2 days. How can a teacher do both? If I'm teaching an online class Monday and Wednesday, I can't also teach my in-person class those days, right? So there's these issues of who's doing the teaching and where, and a lot of that hasn't been addressed, but it's more the idea that we're not really bringing teachers to the table to hear what they think, where people are making decisions without the input of teachers. The CDC guidelines, obviously they don't talk to people who work in schools, because you would know that's not really possible to do in schools. And so how do we get people to the table who understand schools, understand health, understand the virus, and can work together to come up with something workable, which we've seen other countries do, just not here in this country, because we lack the leadership at this time. But, you know, on top of all of this, we saw that during a global pandemic, Black lives don't matter, because police can still kill you for existing. And what's really frustrating with that is how that didn't double down on what happens to children in schools, right? We already know that Black children are on the losing end of America's public education system, and that is by design and intentional. And those things are exacerbated while they have lack of access to technology, to a curriculum that's culturally responsive, to teachers who support and believe in them. And so then, and this is all part of what we do in the Black Lives Matter at School movement, that we're trying to push the 13 guiding principles of the Black Lives Matter Global Network, principles such as restorative justice, empathy, diversity, globalism, Black women, collective value, transgender affirming, queer affirming, intergenerational, Black families, unapologetically Black, loving engagement, as the foundation for how we teach to Black children and about Black people. And then we're also pushing our 4 national demands, which is to hire more Black teachers, to mandate the use of ethnic studies or Black studies in schools, to eliminate zero tolerance and use restorative justice, and to fund counselors and not cops. And we've seen the last 2 really play out in this push that we've seen as a response to the murder of George Floyd, that a lot of districts started saying, we're gonna defund the police. We saw Minneapolis take the lead. We've seen Oakland take the lead. And at a time when the New York City DOE is slashing the New York City budget, but funding the police budget, we see that as a slap in the face to the work to Black Lives Matter and what children need in schools, right? There's been protests about getting the police out of schools, and that's something to consider. We talk about the need to fund counselors, not cops. And we need counselors now more than ever, because children are suffering from trauma from COVID-19. Children and their families are suffering. People are dying, people have lost their jobs, people don't have a way to pay their bills, they're facing eviction, can't eat, they can't get medical treatment, and they don't have anywhere to turn. And we're only making that worse by increasing the use of funding police and having them in schools, because I know who's going to be on the losing end of a "you're not wearing your mask" battle with police in schools. It's going to be Black and brown kids. It's going to be Black and brown kids punished for not being socially distanced, for not wearing masks, for not engaging in the whatever COVID behaviors are that the schools are going to expect of them. And that's only going to be exacerbated by police in schools continuing to do what they do, which is to see students as criminals and not as young people with the right to an education. So that's very upsetting. Another thing that we've seen is, yes, everyone's talking about racial justice, and this is great, but you know, we're still not getting the response that we want from the UFT when it comes to teachers, right? Every year, a group of educators have gone to the UFT, have put forth a resolution to have them endorse the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. The other big union for teachers, NEA, endorses every year. So that gives covers to all teachers who are members of that union to plan their week of action, and to, if they get pushback, to say this is a union-sponsored event. The UFT has not done that in the past, but this year they started to jump on this racial justice bandwagon and say Black Lives Matter. And of course, so they did approve a resolution, but it wasn't from any of the teachers who were in Black Lives Matter at School. It was from someone else, and it was very a watered down, weak resolution of what we've been asking for. We've been asking for support of the teaching of the 13 guiding principles and of the demands, and of even saying Black Lives Matter in school. And so what we're seeing happening right now, and what we want to caution some of the unions about, is this false sense of allyship, right? Everyone's quick to somehow say the murder of George Floyd, this was the straw that broke the camel's back, and they want to get involved. But what we don't need are fake examples of allyship. And so putting forth a resolution that's not what's been asked for from the people who've been doing the work, right? There are a committed group of educators across the New York City area who come together every year on their own time to plan this week of action, right? And they work with community organizations across the city. I get politicians involved. We got a proclamation from one of the representatives in Harlem, right? They do this work each year, but they're not the ones that are, their resolution is not even being heard at a UFT meeting, right? And so that's the way they're doing that. And so we're fortunate to have the Caucus MORE and other groups, NYCORD, that really support the work of the Black Lives Matter at School Week of Action. But we would really like to see the UFT leadership actually step up and support what these educators have been asking for over years. So it's just important to realize the movement to defund police is very much a part of what we're doing, because we know the impact that's going to have on students. The movement to push the Black Lives Matter at school is really important. Maybe some of you from other unions are wondering what it is that you can do to support. Ask your schools and your teachers and your students' teachers, why are they not supporting the Black Lives Matter at school? Because that would be really helpful.
Ooh, thank you, Denisha. So yeah, I think, thank you for speaking about like one of the demands that has come up through the George Floyd rebellion as it existed in New York, which is to defund the NYPD, right? And it had like direct touchstones on the schools because of these school safety agents who were supposedly keeping the peace in school, but also part of this school to prison pipeline where kids are getting disciplined for behavior if they were in a private school they can get away with. So I think it was a huge disappointment when the budget was passed and the demand to defund the NYPD became one of shifting budget lines around and moving the school safety agents from the NYPD to the DOE. I guess in a lower period of struggle, people might have applauded that kind of move, because in '98, Giuliani was the one who moved school security under the NYPD. You could say, okay, well, you know, this is something to applaud, but in the middle of a movement where people are like burning things down, I think you could see how the disappointment came around. And then there was the bigger issue of, you know, okay, so whatever is in this budget, you're shifting around, but why can't we get more? Why do we have to suffer these cuts to begin with, right? Why are over 2,000 adjuncts at CUNY being laid off? Why are the college assistants being laid off? Why is there a hiring freeze for civil servants, but there's still an incoming NYPD cadet class? And it really begs the question as to why working class people and Black people within the working class need to have these budgets balanced on their backs. And why aren't we making the people who are responsible for these crises, the ones who actually run our society, this ruling class, why aren't they paying their fair share, right? And in New York City, we have like a big example of who these people have. We all have Wall Street. Why isn't Wall Street paying for this crisis? When we had the last fiscal crisis in the 70s, the unions very shamefully helped to bail the city out, right? Like they paid money out of the union coffers to say, here, get back on your feet. And it's not as if the city is being gracious to us now and saying, well, you unionized people, you know, you'll be protected. Your pensions and healthcare and everything stays the same. We now have to go into a period of bargaining. And one would think that at least our unions and the union leaders who claim to represent us would push back and say something as simple as tax Wall Street. And taxing Wall Street is something that should be very practical, because Wall Street is supposed to be taxed every time they trade a stock. It's the stock transfer tax, but we've not been collecting it out of gratitude to Wall Street, when Wall Street is doing things like making Sabrina's job impossible, because we now have to count what the median income is for affordable housing by counting in all the millionaires and billionaires who live here through this finance system. So I would hope that as we go into the breakout groups, people will also consider the wider political questions and the nature of the capitalist system we live in, and how we can build towards a socialist alternative that prioritizes people's needs instead. We're gonna move into our breakout groups in a second. Whenever I find how I plan this meeting, yes. So in the breakout groups, we want you to, for the most part, follow some prompts. Peter or Katie, you guys able to put those prompts into the chat?
They're in there.
They're in there already, okay. Thank you. So just take a minute. So when you get into your breakout groups, you need to identify roles for two people. One person needs to be able to come back to the wider body to report on how things went in your breakout group for about 3 to 5 minutes. And then one person needs to facilitate that discussion. So it's kind of like you need a note taker who'll do a quick report back and someone to facilitate the discussion. So you guys all introduce yourselves to each other, get to know each other a little bit about the jobs and across industries, because we're not putting all the educators and all the healthcare people together. It'll be a mix. So those are the prompts. Let me just finish reading through them. So you can respond to something that one of the speakers said that stood out to you, and brainstorm an action that we can take in solidarity with each other, especially in our workplaces or across workplaces as well. So Katie, when you're ready, you can proceed with the breakout.